Okay, I'll go ahead and call to order the Iowa City's Economic Development Committee meeting for Wednesday, October 28, 2019. We like to start by going around the room and having everybody introduce themselves just so it helps with the minutes. So maybe if we can start over here with you, Andrew.
Yeah, I'm Andrew Ballard with New and Munson Architects.
Michael Sather with the Tailwind Group.
Kyle Smith with the Tailwind Group.
Nancy Bird, Iowa City Downtown District.
Zachary Smith, Iowa City Press Citizen.
Laura Burgess. Ashley Monroe, Assistant City Manager.
Ray Heitner, City of Iowa City.
Paul Burnham, Little Village.
Zach Newman, Little Village.
Eleanor Delk, City Attorney.
Simon Andrew, Assistant to the City Manager.
Jeff Fruin, City Manager.
Wendy Ford, Economic Development Coordinator.
Rockney Colt, City Council.
Jim Throgmorton, Mayor.
Kim Betchka, Kirkwood Community College.
Susan Mims, City Council. Thank you, everybody. Item number 2, consider approval of minutes from the June 3rd, 2019 EDC meeting.
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 3-0. Thank you. Item number 3, consider recommendation to support Kirkwood Community College English Language Learner Program expansion with $25,000 per year for 5 years. Are you going to start, Wendy? Or?
I'll start. Hi, everybody. As you know, we have been working on your strategic priorities over the last couple of years at least. The first one of which is shown up here on the slide wallpaper, if you will. And that is to promote a strong and resilient economy. And a couple years ago, you had added a tactic in there through cooperation with the Iowa City Community School District, Kirkwood Community College, and other similar organizations to help marginalized populations and low-income individuals gain access to skills and training for jobs. So we've been doing a lot of research and getting to know many of the organizations in our area. And one in particular, Kirkwood Community College, has risen to, has stepped up, I guess is the word, and is looking at accomplishing 2 things with an expansion of an ESL program or English Language Learning Program that they have. And Kim Betchka, their Vice President for Continuing Ed and Training, will be here to tell you a little bit more about it. But in short, Kirkwood is trying to address 2 things. One is helping people become more employable and thus become employed, and also to help the workforce pool that is really tight in our economy. So Kirkwood has, the President, Lori Sundberg, has said that she will put resources towards this in the southern end of the corridor here, serving especially the Iowa City, Coralville, North Liberty area, and that to do a good job of that, they'll need about $150,000 for 5 years. They've been able to come up with half of that money, and they're asking the cities locally to chip in, and staff is recommending that City of Iowa City contribute $25,000 a year for that 5-year period to grow that, or expand the ELL program for our residents here on the south end of the corridor. There are a lot of numbers that would support the dire need. I think the one that really hit me was one that talked about the need for English language learning, additional English language learning for kids in the Iowa City Community School District. And just about 5 or 6 years ago, 300 kids were on the list for needing that ELL. And right now, it's at least 1,600. So that's just kids in the school district, and they obviously come from families with parents as well. So you can see that need really expands once you look out past the families and the parents of those kids who need work as well. So without going any further, beyond saying staff is recommending this $25,000, I will hand it over to Kim Betchka, who can talk a little bit more about it.
Great. And so I have some handouts here, not necessarily that I'm going to go through it, but it does have a lot of data if you want to, look at that at a later time, both in terms of the projections we're seeing seeing for growth of English language learners, as well as all of the different audiences we serve, their employment rates currently, et cetera. So the point of that being that we've really looked at our data and the community's data in coming forward with this request. As you know, Lori, our president's been with us just a year, and it was in the first quarter that she was here at Kirkwood that she recognized this as a problem as well, and quite frankly said having waiting lists on the southern tier of the area for English language learners is not acceptable. And so that's when our team put together a proposal in terms of the funding we would need to do two things. One is to expand the sections we have available, because we do have waiting lists, so we're not able to offer enough sections based on our current level of funding. With offering more sections, we also want to offer more sections out in the communities. So for example, we would like to be offering classes for parents of kids in the school system in the school system, right, where they are comfortable coming to every day. And then also out into the communities such as North Liberty, Coralville. We have more space at the Johnson Regional Center, but at our main campus, we don't have any more space to offer classes. So the other component of that is at Kirkwood, we have 4 levels of English language learning, and in level 1, it's both individuals who need literacy as well as who have a low level of English speaking. And we believe in talking with community partners as we prepared our proposal here in the southern end, that we are committed to working more closely with the community partners to determine if we can all rally around the same curriculum, and then potentially out of this $150,000 be able to fund some of the community organizations to provide literacy ESL, and then they would transfer into level 1 when they are ready for the level 1 ESL based on the score. And I know there's some interest in that from a meeting that we had, and that really just goes to we know where our niche is, and we know community providers have a niche more in the literacy area, so to speak. So we're excited about that opportunity to create that pathway. The second area that we will be supporting with this funding is what we call earn and learn programs. So as English language learners get to levels 2 and 3, research shows that they're at a point where, given the right contextualized industry-based curriculum, they can compete for good jobs in the community. So an example program which has received lots of press and you might be familiar with is at Nordstrom. They have an earn and learn program. We worked with them on that program. We provide the contextualized English component where we are helping them with the safety processes and procedures, safety language, other terminology used within the plant. And then Nordstrom worked on helping create a career pathway internally to the organization, and also reshaping a bit some of the first jobs that they get while they're still learning English as a way to help them. And that's been very successful. And we also have a couple healthcare systems that are also launching earn and learn programs as well. And we do have interest in 2 North Liberty companies in particular that may be very interested in an earn and learn program. So we believe there is opportunity to also accelerate English language learning to help individuals obtain good wage, good quality jobs with benefits. Many of our students are working, and in the data, you can look and see those percentages. However, many are working outside of the region. They travel an hour or 2 to get to where they want to work and then come back, and they want to work in this region. So that is our goal as well. if this can move forward, we will work with the City of Iowa City on a memorandum of understanding so that we have clear metrics and goals, which will be reported back, however you want those, quarterly or annually, to ensure that we're meeting your expectations related to the funding.
Well, thank you. I know that, gosh, probably it's been more than a year ago, I know I met with, and I think former Councilor Kingsley Botchway did, and I think, Jim, maybe you were involved in one of these meetings with faculty at the Kirkwood Center here in Iowa City who do a lot of the ELL training and classes, and they were talking about that same thing, the lack of space, the lack of staff, and just the incredible need. And there's a group of people kind of polling what was actually going on in the community through maybe some churches, religious organizations, and different community organizations to help do this. So I'm really excited to see a more formalized plan coming to us and partnering with Kirkwood and the city to try and bolster the room for more training. And one of the things we've talked about a lot are those job opportunities, and so difficult if you cannot communicate. So I'll be very supportive of this and look forward to being able to take this to the full council. Other comment?
Yeah, I mean, this is an easy choice, and I'm in particular really glad to see the collaboration effective collaboration we've had other staff as well as Kirkwood, as well as the Iowa City School District. And I think everyone in the community talks about that. We each have our own individual mission. Kirkwood has a lot of things on their agenda. We do as well. That's our primary mission. But when we can cooperate on a case-by-case basis, especially on a group of people that we really all care about, that it just really warms the heart to see that happen. Really excited about it. Slightly different topic, but I'm also hoping moving forward that the Kirkwood will also reach out to the community about some maybe reverse language skills in terms of maybe them teaching us, if there are any other programs along the lines, with
great.
Arabic or Spanish or Mandarin. Obviously, funds are limited, but hopefully we can see more of those sort of as well, because I'm excited to learn with all these alternative language speakers.
Yes.
Hopefully we can pick up some of those skills as well, but
Be happy to do
fabulous.
that.
Well, I too think it's a terrific suggestion. I look forward to seeing an elaboration of the proposed plan. You're right, Susan. I've had several conversations with people out at the Iowa City campus of Kirkwood about this, but not Lori. I've not talked with Lori about it and not talked with you about it, and it's good to see you again, incidentally. Yeah, so I'm really struck by some of the data that's in the memo and also in the handout that you just gave us, and the stuff in the handout does not appear in the memo, but with regard to adults, I noticed that over the 6 years from 2010 to 2016, there was a net increase of 8,481 people in Johnson County, not Iowa City, but Johnson County. Of those, 67% were international immigrants, and English language skills can often be a barrier to finding employment. That's totally consistent, of course, with everything I hear out in the community. And that gets me to the next thing, which is one of these charts you show us, a pie chart about languages.
Yes.
Spoken by, what's the total population of the people listed here?
I don't have that. 872.
Okay, so it's a sample or what?
That's our total number of students in the Iowa City area right now.
Okay.
That we're serving.
So, but it's students, not adults,
No.
right?
Well, it's our adult students that we
Adults.
serve.
All right, so what I'm really struck by, and this again is completely consistent with what I think most of us have seen, and I'm sorry, my vision is really bad. I just had injections in my eyes. So Spanish, 26% of the people that were listed are Spanish speakers. Almost 30% are French speakers, and another 17% are Arabic speakers. So that's roughly 75% of all the recent immigrants, right? So I think Rockne's right. It'd be great if we had a little bit of inverse education as well. But the crucial need is to help these adults learn to speak or understand a sufficient amount of English to be able to function well at the level they want to be able to function at, too, in our community. It would provide a great, great service.
Yep, fabulous.
One last question I had. Kirkwood is providing half of the funding that they need. Obviously, there's been discussion with Iowa City, and staff has made the recommendation that we would do 25. I'm assuming you're having discussions with other municipalities and/or organizations, companies, even within the area.
Yes, we are. So we're having conversations with the city of Coralville, the city of North Liberty, the Johnson County Supervisors, city of Tiffin, and city of West Branch.
Are you doing any requests of any of the businesses in the southern end of the corridor as well? Or?
We held an employer forum, and so we're in the process now of making calls back to those employers. My interpretation of the meeting is that more than likely they will contribute through Earn and Learn instead of a cash contribution, but we are talking with them about that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay. Any other questions, comments? Okay. Get back here. So do we need a motion on this to send it to council? Where are we at?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Passes 3-0. Thank you very much, Kim. This is exciting.
Thank you all
This
very
is
much, and we will be back in touch soon.
all right. Okay. Very good.
Thanks for coming, Kim.
Oh, thank you.
Item number 4, discuss the Tailwind's proposal for historic preservation and redevelopment project on the south side of the 100 block of East College Street. Whoever wants to come on up that's going to be presenting, please do so.
Andrew, and I'll start us out here. Today, you're going to hear about a project proposal involving the historic preservation of 3 19th century buildings and a 9-story building behind them downtown. In July, we received a TIF financing request, a preliminary request from the Tailwinds group, who proposed keeping the buildings that we also dearly love on the south side of the 100 block of College Street in downtown Iowa City, removing some additions made to a couple of those buildings to make way for a building that would fit between the alley in that block and behind the buildings of that block. The project would ensure the historic preservation of all of those buildings along College Street that are involved, and that goes from Martini's building up to what housed Gray's and a Mexican restaurant shortly after that in the Dooley block. And I've got to keep reminding myself which ones are which by the old names by using the last known retailer that was in those buildings. So forgive me if I'm doing that too much here. The 9-story building they proposed behind the buildings, the old buildings, would have 170 apartment units in it, mostly studios, 1s and 2 bedrooms. I think from the numbers I figured out there would only be a handful of 2 bedrooms. The first 2 floors of the 9 stories would be a parking garage that would accommodate almost all of the, it would accommodate many of the parking requirements needed for the project, but not quite all. So we would anticipate the developers coming back, requesting a waiver or to work with us on fees in lieu for some of the parking requirements not able to be met on that site.
And Wendy, a waiver is permitted when historic preservation is involved, is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes, there is a provision for that through the Board of Adjustment. So obviously, a 9-story building exceeds the desired height buildings that we've been talking about since we updated our tax increment financing policies in 2017, at which time we said, well, we'd consider a taller building if the developer would come forward with exceptional public benefits. And they, knowing that, have come back to us in this preliminary proposal with what we think are worth considering as exceptional public benefits. The first is that they would locally designate as historic landmarks the buildings that are not already local landmarks. Interestingly, the Martini's building is, and I think I indicated that it would need to be locally designated in my memo. That was an error. It was already designated both local and national before. So the other 2 buildings would would be designated local historic landmarks, which would thereby ensure they'd be saved for perpetuity. Excuse me. As well as saving the buildings, they would also renovate, and they have plans for bringing the buildings back to what would be more of a character that would go with the time that the buildings were built. And Andrew's going to talk a little bit more about that as well. Along with historic preservation, there was a state sustainability requirement in our TIF policies, which read that any new building would have to be built to LEED Silver certified. And the developers come to us and said, we will do this 9-story building to LEED Platinum certified level. Additionally, we feel that the project should gain some additional sustainability credit for leaving buildings in place. As Carl Elefant said, and he's the former president of the American Institute of Architects, he said, the most sustainable building is the one already standing. So not only would we have a new building that was built to LEED Platinum, we would be saving buildings from being razed and landfilled, essentially. And then finally, as a third exceptional public benefit, the developers have been working with a local nonprofit, or a local arts group, I should say, for space that would be above what is now the Union Bar. And some of you know that that was once a ballroom space up there, and we feel that the reuse of that space as a public gathering space for the arts would be a great public benefit as well, and help ensure that we continue to be known as, one of the greatest small cities of the arts by enhancing that downtown. So along with those exceptional public benefits, we feel that the project would also reactivate a part of the street that has been typically quiet, well, very quiet in front of what was once the Field House building, and hasn't really had a tenant in it for years now. And the Union building, the Union Bar building, which is dead during the daytime as well. So while the developers don't have tenants figured out yet for all of the spaces that they would have, the plans are to include a full-service restaurant as well. We would have the arts group using a portion of the building, and the rest to be determined, the rest of the users to be determined in there, but essentially enhancing street life in front of those buildings. I think those were about the extent of my comments there. I can talk a little bit about the process of attaining a local historic landmark designation, if you like, but we can hear first from the developer and let you hear a little bit more about the project, and also have Andrew introduce the team from Tailwinds who are here today. So I'm going to hand this over to you, Andrew. I'll open your document here. Let's see. I don't know how you got it to be.
I went to view and then full screen. Yeah,
there we go.
It's gone. Okay.
Okay, there you go. There's your microphone.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Can we dim the lights?
Yep.
Oh, perfect.
Is that good enough, or should I go lower?
There's one that says projector.
on it.
Yeah, I mean that should be plenty fine.
That's great.
And from the development team, it's Kyle Smith and Michael Sather are in the front right there for me. And I think Wendy covered a lot of the items very well. So as I get into it, I'll try not to cover too much of the same territory. Let's see. So first, just a brief overview of the context, the key objectives, which are where we mesh with what the city is going for, we believe, the Ped Mall facades and the impact on the Ped Mall, then the existing proposed layout, so you get a sense of what the modifications would be, and then what the value the building would bring, and then the new building impact, and that's specifically on the Ped Mall, which is, I think, rightfully an area of concern and interest. So first, just the overview, and I think y'all are probably fairly familiar with it and all, but so this is the College Block, which is the Martinis, the Crescent Block, which contains the Union Bar. I think that's kind of the business that marks the Crescent Block, and then the Dooley Block. And then this new building would sit behind on the alley, adjacent to the Graduate. So this is the part that would echo what was just discussed earlier. And so I'll run through this fairly quickly. We talked about the Designate historic landmarks, which is going to be, from our research, the best protection for the buildings for posterity. Below that, the Activate Ped Mall with small businesses is a part of the master plan vision. There will be some modifications of the buildings, and I'll explain what those would be. But a lot of that action is it's perfect for right-sizing small businesses. So the spaces were either so large that they couldn't be rented out, or they're so large that they don't work so well for our city. So this will help enliven the Ped Mall by inviting small businesses to flourish, which is, I think, is an important intent with our city. And then the provide exceptional public benefit. As Wendy mentioned, we're in fairly advanced talks with a local arts group. They need to make sure that their finances are all set and everything before we really go forward with it. But we're extremely excited about that component for the greatest small city, the arts aspect, and just the vibrancy of the Ped Mall in the downtown. And then below that, the match new building height to that of the Graduate. And I guess this is a point where we'd like to stress that the fact that there is a new building behind the historic fabric, the financiers or the pro forma of that new building is a major component to why the existing Ped Mall facing buildings can be saved and maintained. So that's a huge part of the logic of the project. And so all the discussion of exceptional public benefit also allows us to achieve a slightly greater height, but that height will be capped at the Graduate's black and yellow plaid wall, so we won't go any higher than that, which is 110 feet. And then promote environmental sustainability, as we discussed, as the platinum is it's a challenge that we considered deeply in the office. We talked amongst ourselves what it would take to achieve that, and we're up for the challenge and excited about the city's stance on carbon emissions and climate disaster, et cetera. So we're excited about that, and the city's excited about it. Then the reuse of the existing buildings, as Wendy discussed, and the densification of downtown, which we feel is this project does very appropriately. It'll bring a range of tenants. There is a range of studio, 1-bed, and some 2-bed, and I think that'll increase the vibrancy of the Ped Mall environment, the downtown environment. One of the reasons that we're able to achieve the LEED Platinum is because the LEED system, it really encourages buildings that are so close to walkable cities or nearby transportation networks. So just a few, just to give some historical perspective on the Ped Mall facades first. So this is looking over the Dooley building, and then the Crescent building, or Crescent block, and then the College block. And you can see in the next two slides, they show kind of a slight before and after around 1929. So the Dooley block is a whole feature on the left in 1910. And then around 1929, it was cut up a little bit or renovated to be Sears and Roebuck. And that'll become evident in when we look at it in a plan. So that's one major transition that the Dooley block went through. The other one is the Crescent block's transition. And you can see on the left, this is a 1925 picture. The building is 1800s, I believe. It's all as one whole on the left, and you can see that Montgomery Ward moved in and made some changes to the lower left of the facade. Then those were changed again later on to become what is now the Union Bar. So these are the existing facades below in an elevation, and then what we propose to change about them or modify. And basically, you can see that the changes are fairly slight. On what is on the right, the Dooley block was the Sears and Roebuck. The facade's in fairly good shape. It would be cleaning up, replacing pieces that are broken off, and that sort of thing. The most significant alteration we would do would be to take the Union Bar part, which is in the lower left of the Crescent, and try to bring it back up to speed to where it was in the Montgomery Ward days. And in addition, and this relates to the cultural aspect, would be to what is now, what was the soapbox, I believe, and now is part of Revival, is kind of an offside thing, Revival, would be to build that as a more of a substantial entryway into the building, consistent with what was there earlier. So that's on the Pedmal side. So then looking back on the opposite side, you can get a sense of what these additions are that we would be cleaning away so that the original blocks could stand. So we've called out the Dooley block, Crescent block, and College block. Those are the original features. Then when Montgomery Ward, at some point in its history, it extended out the back, and Sears and Roebuck did a similar thing. And then there's some scattered sort of lean-to additions that would be removed in this proposal. So in the ground plan, you can see where the additions are. You can see dash what the proposed new building is. And then this would be the new scheme. So there's a shared entry into what's labeled the shared garden there. And that would provide access both into the new building and then some supplementary access, say, to get up to the third floor of the Crescent block. If we could locate an elevator there, that sort of thing. So that's the proposed scheme diagrammatically, the basic layout. Now on to these. The next two and final two slides are about the impact that we were studying on the Pedmal itself. So you can see this is the 110 that is the graduate building height. So we would keep to that. What this is looking at first is the mix of units. You can see the 2 levels of parking, some levels of studio, then 1 2-bed, 2 beds, and 2-bed penthouse is the proposal right now as it stands. You can see the Crescent block, and then sight lines for 1 with the dashed red line, which, I mean, I think that demonstrates that it's not very visible from even all the way across the Pedmal, looking dead on, and I'll flesh that out a little bit later. And the other aspect this looks at is shadow lines. So the concern could conceivably be that during the summer or the winter, it's going to shade the Pedmal and overshadow it and make it inhospitable. And what we found with this diagram is that, so say this is the winter solstice, it does shade the Pedmal. However, the buildings of the Pedmal themselves also shaded. And then in the equinox, March, September, and June 20, there's no impact on the Pedmal at all. And to give that, so that's a cross-section looking through to give some variation, and this is on visibility, this study more than on the shading, because I think the previous diagram covers the shading. We have 3 views, one from kind of in front of the Weather Dance Pavilion, one directly across, and then one from the intersection with South Clinton. So one, you can see that you would be able to see part of the building from in front of the Weather Dance Pavilion, but our impression was, in looking at it in 3D, that it seems set back, and it's a relatively minor view of it. Directly across, it would be difficult to make out. Depending where you stand, you could see nothing of it, or it could peek out in the corner. And then from South Clinton, this is the building here. Very low visibility, and given the trees and the foliage, it seemed seemed almost negligible to us. So yeah, there's I think that's the full run through. Yeah.
Shall we open it up to questions? Are you ready for that?
Yeah, I
Or
think that'd
would
be
you
fine.
like to have your
Y'all can join
team
if you want to.
speak? Yeah.
You're welcome. Come on up. Is there anything that either of you would like to add to it before we kind of get into it?
I think we're fine with questions.
Okay. Well, I must say, when I looked at this, one of the things that surprised me, and I mean, I understand the depth of those buildings because we've, kind of looked at that before as some of this has, been brought up. But it really did surprise me that when you stand across the Ped Mall, you virtually can't see it at all. I mean, I really thought you'd be able to see at least a couple of stories over the top of those buildings. And so I really was surprised that you really can't see anything. And so I think that's a real positive. And I know that that we had asked about, the shadow impact on the Ped Mall. And I had certainly asked that with staff because that can already, I think, be an issue, especially in the winter. We get the snow, we get the ice, and if you don't get any sunshine on there, which we don't sometimes, makes it all the worse, and didn't want this to exacerbate that, and that obviously is not the case. The current buildings already, cast a shadow all the way across the ground surface. I just want to say, as I look at this and, look at the exceptional benefits, public benefits here, and I mean, we won't go through all of them in detail, but I think they are significant. When we talk about the historic preservation, that has always been one of my key concerns, is that as people walk that Ped Mall, the ambiance of that physical space with those building fronts and with the trees and everything else was critically important. And so the fact that we get the opportunity through your work to preserve those, and with the historic designations, really preserve those forever, essentially is fantastic. The other is the sustainability, et cetera, and the public art things. I won't go on, but I just think we're getting a lot of public benefit for a great project, and I think, even given the height, which for some people may have some concerns, it is hidden enough that I would certainly hope that it doesn't become a huge deterrent for a lot of people in this process. So I'm excited with what I see.
I'm curious, in terms of this concept of using the height and back and the historic frontage, do you have any examples of any comparables where that's been done in other locations? It's certainly an intriguing concept, but I'm still having trouble imagining what that will actually look like. Can you identify other communities that have done something similar?
More often, we see that there'll be the shell of the building preserved, and then the new building will be either, or take up the inside, sort of a, I guess it's called like facadism, or that the existing building will be preserved to a degree, and there'll be a growth on one of the corners, kind of step back from the street. I'm sure that I can find examples of a similar type of situation to this, but it's less common than you'd think. Like the actual preservation of the historic building and the new building behind it, it's usually not set back that far, I suppose.
The sites that we have to work with.
Right. Yeah.
I was in Burlington, Vermont a couple of years ago and walked along their pedestrian mall with the mayor, and he described to me a building that was almost exactly like this. At least that's the way I remember it. I don't claim that that's factually true. It would be helpful, though, if you would look into that and see if, in fact, they built a structure kind of like this, set back. I do remember very clearly the conversation with him because of our own situation down here.
Okay. Yeah, I'll look into that.
Yeah, his name's Milo. I've forgotten, Weinberger, I think, but I probably have that wrong. I have several questions. Sure. Okay to go? Yeah, so first of all, we went through a very lengthy and sometimes heated conversation about how to amend our TIF policy, and we did so 2 years ago. That is, we completed that 2 years ago. So I'm very pleased to see this particular proposal coming our way. On first blush, it looks to me like it's consistent with what we did in amending the TIF policy back then. But I do think I need to ask some sort of probing questions so I can, basically do my due diligence about it. So one has to do with what I routinely hear from local residents and property owners about all the big new buildings that are being built in town. So the basic claim is, why do we need all these new buildings? And I hear it all the time. So I'm wondering, If you could, in your own way, describe the kind of due diligence you have been doing to be clear that there's market demand, sufficient market demand for the kind of units you propose to build, and therefore that the building itself would be viable. So can you help us out with that?
Sure. Obviously, being in the market for some time, obviously there's significant demand, and I think the demand question comes down to demand and the affordability of the demand, right? And so I think when you look at Andrew's design and you think when you look at Newman Munson's design, part of that is where we got to today. Smaller units, smaller effective rents. And so that's kind of the start to finish of where we've gotten to this point. It's not so much demand as the whole factor, but also the affordability of the demand. And so I think that's a direct answer to your question. I think to Susan's point earlier, in some of her comments, I think I'll kick the ball over to Jeff and his team. I'm in the goalposts that your team had put up for us, as far as what you thought this should look like and what that process should look like. I think maybe it needs to be commended as well. I think you did a nice job of at least getting us pointed in the right direction, so there wasn't a whole lot of time wasted, and we got from the point A to B very quickly. So I want to make sure I make that public comment as well, but to your point.
Yeah, okay, good. So what's the, average size of the units,
That's a trick.
square footage? Or what are you anticipating? I should
Smallest of
say?
350 and largest of 880.
Right?
Yeah, okay, that's kind of what I expected, but just curious about that. Okay, a few other questions. One has to do with the height of the building. It's, Wendy's memo indicates 9 stories, but when I counted the stories, including the parking, it's 11. So what's the actual proposed height of the building? Not in feet, but in stories?
It's 9 stories plus 2 parking.
Yeah, okay.
It goes to 110 feet.
Okay, so a total of 11, though 9 would be occupied or used, right? In the
Technically, one's underground, that's your camp.
Yeah. One of the parking levels is partially underground, but
Your shadows.
Yeah, I thought I saw that too. Okay, I guess, 30% underground or something like that. Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. Also, and this is really a question for staff probably, do I understand correctly that affordable housing component would be part of this by code?
Yeah, your TIF policy requires 15% affordable, and that's at a 60% AMI. And that would be a minimum of 20 years. If we get to a point where the TIF period is longer than 20 years, then the affordability period grows as well.
Okay, good. With regard to the LEED component, I'm thrilled to see that you are committed to getting certified at LEED Platinum. I assume that means that you would do what's required to get LEED Platinum certification. And just to qualify a little bit of what Wendy said earlier, I think our amended policy says LEED Silver, including 8 energy efficiency points, is what would be required. So I'm really pleased to see that you're going beyond that, but it's a good thing. So especially in light of our climate action plan and the way we've recently altered it, we need to be on a path toward achieving the goals that we set out. And I think, frankly, it would be embarrassing to us if we approved this building without really advanced energy efficiency in it, beyond what the state code currently requires, in other words. Okay, so there's that. And I'm thrilled about the arts group part of it. I think I know who you have in mind. I'm not going to name anybody, but if I'm right, what I think is the case, I'm very thrilled about that. But I do. The last thing I want to probe a little bit is there's language in our amended TIF policy about not adversely affecting the historic character of the streetscape. And I don't remember the exact language and didn't have time to look it up. So the fact that the new building would be set back is a really important part of that. But I'd like to be clear, all of us to be clear about what our policy said or says with regard to that. You got it there
And there are a
somewhere?
couple of copies of it right there, if you want to slide one down to Rockne, but I can read it off here. For a proposed project that would be located on a street with substantial number of buildings eligible for historic landmark designation, the tallest portion of the project must be stepped back from its street frontages far enough to produce no significant impact on the existing historic character of the street fronts when seen from the public right-of-way.
Good, very good. So and obviously you're striving to do that. So I walked by there today, and like Susan, I was surprised to look head-on at whichever building that is. That's the tallest of the buildings, and to try to think about a taller building behind it. And I think, oh, well, probably it wouldn't be very visible from the northern side of College Street. But then I walked up to 110, where one of the bars is, and then down to 125 and just a little bit past it. And I thought, okay, then you can see more of the building. So in principle, I'd like to see maybe a couple other renderings from those positions so that we can be more clear about the effect on the historic character of the streetscape. And with regard to that, I think a more thorough shadow analysis would be completely appropriate because this site is so important to us. But beyond that, I think you've clearly taken the kind of steps that we had in mind. And I want to live out the policies that we work so hard to adopt. So, yeah, great start is what I would say, and you're pretty far along.
Jim, can I just clarify what you're, and maybe they have this question, what more would you want to see on the shadow analysis? I mean, if they're committing to not going over 110 feet, and assuming that their graphics are all correct, which I'm assuming they are, well, I'm sure staff will be looking at them and you'll be double checking them. And they're showing, I guess in my vision, the worst case scenario in that showing it basically from the south, to the north, which is where the sun's going to be when you get that most of the angle across College Street. So I guess I'm not sure what you're asking of them in terms of a more thorough shadow analysis.
I think architects know what a shadow analysis looks like. This is not really a shadow analysis. What I'm thinking about is looking straight down on the site and seeing the shadow move or where it is at each, the solstices and the equinoxes, so that we can have a much better sense of how the shadow plays out in the streetscape. I don't think it would be a barrier, so I'm not trying to throw up a big hurdle, but I do think that this is relevant to the site and the project, and something that architects know how to do.
Yeah, it's. I appreciate it. It's not a very big ask, and I am pretty confident with the graphics we've shown, so it's not a problem.
Okay.
I was going to say, as long as it's not time consuming and expensive, that's my key concern. Are you done, John?
Yeah, maybe something else would come up. But those are the questions and points I definitely wanted to make. So
are we making comments now?
Sure.
Okay. So I just got to say, I don't like this project. I love it. I think you guys hit it out of the park. And I think when we did this TIF revision, I think there was really one key issue, which was, were we aiming too high? And were we creating standards that were so high that maybe we wouldn't actually be able to get a market-based proposal to sort of accomplish what our vision is? What we were trying to do is, as this committee knows, we've had development controversies over the years, but what we tried to do is communicate enough specifics on the front end so that the developer didn't have to go through this whole process and then really worry at the back end, well, gee, what's the community benefit here when we're up there and you guys are at the podium? Well, in my view, that's almost too late, and that's a failure. In this particular case, on the front end, you guys were able to do this, and I think in particular the Platinum LEED, I think, is fabulous, because that was an issue. One of the things we were concerned about was, is that feasible? Is that possible? Now, whether it's Platinum or Gold, I don't want to set the bar too low here, but I would be comfortable with gold if it turns out the platinum is too high, if it turns out. But I mean, I think if we're looking at a gap analysis for purposes of TIF, I think one of the key things with environmental factors is you can monetize it internally in terms of the reduction in costs. But there are a lot of things that you cannot monetize in terms of just the public benefit. And so as I see it, that's perfectly appropriate for the community in terms of, at least that's my view, to help make that happen, because a lot of those environmental benefits cannot be monetized. The second piece of it is the landmark. I think that's huge. You know, downtown, I think the key issue that we all struggle with on a day-in-and-day-out basis is how do we preserve what we really love about it while also allowing that economic growth to continue, that we don't, you know, pave our parking lot, pave paradise with a parking lot, right, or to that effect. And I think you didn't do that. You preserve these historic structures. I think you're going to make them even come more alive and even more activate them, and I'm very thrilled with that. And then finally, this question of the arts organization. You know, I see Nancy Bird there. You know, one of the goals and challenges we've all had is how do we really provide a variety of different options downtown? Easy to state, hard to do. So to the extent that we can have this development and at the same time sort of activate some other spaces that don't involve excessive amounts of alcohol is always a very good thing. So I am really thrilled with it. I hope that we get, and I think probably will, the rest of council, it's hard to say, but at least for me, I think you guys did a really good job of taking in these concerns. And in terms of the community benefit, I think what you've outlined, at least as far as I'm concerned, is sufficient, but I would want to see all three. So to me, if we said, oh, well, we couldn't do the platinum, we couldn't do the arts organization, just the landmark, to me, that would not be extraordinary. To me, I think you guys are meeting that standard, and I want to make sure that the term extraordinary doesn't lose all of its meaning, so that if we do deviate, because as Jim really points out, the Ped Mall, we all love it. People in the state of Iowa love it. And they're downtown, everyone loves it. So I think that because it's so important to all of us, if we do deviate from what we typically do, we really have to be able to justify it in terms of how does the community benefit at large. And certainly when you talk about nonprofit arts organization, I think we get that community thing. Because one of the things I was concerned about is that those community benefits wouldn't be internalized for the residents themselves. It's good for the residents, but not necessarily for the community. But so I love it. I'm an enthusiastic supporter of it, and I think it's really thrilling to have an idea and a process that took over a year to do and sort of see the harvest here. And then once you guys are able to make it work, hopefully we'll see other developers say, hey, you know what, these standards aren't too high, because they are high standards, and I think that was going to be one of the questions, whether we could get these. And I think this is really one of our first key proposals with this. And of course, the affordable housing piece, absolutely use the market to be able to add that stock, I think is fabulous.
Well, one of the other things I would just want to piggyback on is Kyle's comment about staff. I think staff has had some, one-off conversations with council just to kind of get an idea where we're at with very preliminary proposal, ideas of what you were thinking. And I think that certainly has allowed the city manager and his staff to guide this. And so I think it certainly has facilitated your process and hopefully saved you an awful lot of time in terms of getting to something that, is getting such strong support from this committee at first presentation. So I want to thank Jeff and your staff, because that's one of the things developers complain about the most is, having to jump through so many hoops but not knowing what the hoops look like. So the more we can give you direction up front, and good guidance, it saves you an awful lot of time and money and headaches. So I'm glad that we've been able to communicate that to staff, kind of what we are thinking in generalities, and that they've been able to communicate that to you as well to make this process, at least so far, the best that we can. So.
Yeah, I'd agree with you, Susan, about that. I'd also want to emphasize that the reason we're doing this right now is to be fully transparent to the broader public about the proposal that's tentatively being presented to us and about our response to that proposal. Mm-hmm. And therefore, they can express whatever views they have. It facilitates the overall process when you can kind of do that kind of thing up front, rather than wait at the last second and then bam, you suddenly get an explosion of stuff.
And I would agree with that, Jim. And it was interesting because there has already been press coverage of this online today. And what is interesting is, without people necessarily having any of the details, the bulk of the comments that were already online today are very anti the project because of the TIF. And so I think what that says is that we continue to have a lot of work to do in this community to educate the general public about what we do with TIF, why we do TIF, and what we see as the benefit to the community. A number of those comments were talking about giving money away to the rich, and, that we should be spending more money on affordable housing and that sort of stuff. And so I think that people don't, and I get it, if you're not intimately involved in it, you don't understand all the nuances, but it's work that we as a city have to continue to do to explain to people that when these kind of projects come forward, we do that gap analysis, and we have an independent outside third party who does that and justifies the fact that this is not an economically feasible project for the developer to do without public assistance. And thus, we as a city and the taxpayers ultimately, I look at, if a TIF is analyzed and done properly, I look at it as an investment of public tax dollars. By foregoing those tax dollars, that it is an investment in the future of our community. And not only is it an investment in the increased taxable value down the road once we're getting taxes off the whole thing, but as we've talked about here, all those extraordinary public benefits coming out of the project itself, the arts, the historic preservation, the sustainability of the building itself. And so I think what that says is, as a staff, as city council members, and as the developers and architects, et cetera, we still have a lot of education to do to explain why we sit here and think this is a good project for our community.
I'd elaborate just a little bit. If you had come to us, or some other developer had come to us with a proposal to demolish the buildings that are not currently designated as historic landmarks and to build an 8-story building above them and behind, and without any advanced LEED certification, that is, energy efficiency requirements, it would go nowhere. There's no way on earth I would support it. But you have responded to the values that we expressed in our amended TIF policy, and they are values that I believe we should live out because we worked so hard to develop those particular amendments. And I think, in general, what you've proposed is really responsive to those, to that revised TIF policy, and would be a great asset to the downtown in all sorts of ways that would play out over decades. So, so I'm feeling pretty good about it.
Well, I think with historic preservation, especially downtown, my preference would be that someday we could get a historic preservation district. I don't think that's going to happen. There's too many ways that can fail. And so really, but I do think generally the carrot is always better than the stick. So to provide those incentives so people are voluntarily wanting to do it is always better than sort of a government coercion. And I don't think the community, there's just not the unanimity of support on that. So I think this is great. I think the other thing, to Jim's point, even though there is going to be some dissent on here, I think once some more of these details come out, I think the community is going to be very, very excited about it. And I think the other part of it is that once you do have some of this public benefit, hopefully on the back end, not only will you persuade the people up there, but the community at large, so that they continue to have this sort of development. Because as Jeff points out a lot, we have to plan for continuing reductions from the state legislature, in terms of our tax base. And as far as I can tell, there's only multiple ways we can deal with that. We can either borrow more, we can either tax more, we can either cut, or we can grow. And I think this is a good example of hopefully planning for those future years that could be lean through that continued growth.
Any other comments that any of you would like to add?
No, other than thank you very much for the opportunity.
Well, we really appreciate your taking the time to come in and the work that you've already done and to give us kind of a heads up on what you're thinking and some details. And as Jim said, so this really gets out into the public. And we'll look forward to seeing you back with the more formal proposals as time goes on. So thank you.
One quick question.
Sure.
When are we actually going to get the analysis in terms of the TIF proposal, in terms of what we will get, and also what the projected tax revenue will be, and also the protected debt levy?
Sure. As the developer has some comfort now that this proposal would gain some traction, we can start diving into the numbers more in detail. We'll work with them with the same pro forma we've worked with other developers on, and see what that gap is, and their proposal for how much equity they would have in the project and so forth, and tax revenue for it. You know, it's important to remember that even when we're giving rebates, the debt service levy for all the jurisdictions receiving tax dollars still remains in place. That's protected, and they won't receive a rebate on that. So the tax dollars will always be greater immediately after the project compared to what they are today. And one other thing I'd note is a good chunk of that gap is frequently created by the 15% affordable housing requirement. So as people maybe criticize publicly the affordability piece, that's a good chunk of what you are investing in these projects.
Thanks, Simon.
Okay, good point. All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Great.
Appreciate it.
Great seeing all of you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Moving on to item number 5, consider a recommendation to the City Council to proceed to establish the highway commercial tax abatement area. Wendy?
Yeah. Okay, so we looked at this a couple of, 1 or 2 meetings ago, and have fleshed out the urban revitalization tax exemption area. Sorry, I'm getting renewal, revitalization, exemption confused. This is the urban revitalization tax exemption area, or areas, I should say. We're calling it one area, the highway commercial area, which is comprised of, you'll see an area concentrated, the mouse doesn't show up here. On the left of the slide is the Highway 1 and 218 intersection, and then traveling east, the next greater concentration is around the Gateway 1 and the old Paul's site. And continuing east is the area that is central to the Southgate and Olympic Court area, including the Pepperwood Plaza, and a part that juts up north there that is not included in the riverfront crossings area. And that was one of our points in including this. We wanted to extend incentive benefits to areas that did not necessarily have urban renewal benefits already. And then finally out on the east side is the intersection with Highway 6 and First Avenue over there. So we looked at a number of formulas for the tax exemption schedule. The state allows you the state suggests several schedules and allows you to make up your own if you like, so long as it isn't in a greater, doesn't have a greater tax exemption benefit than they suggest. And we thought we would keep it simple, of having a 5-year schedule that had a declining rate starting at an 80% exemption on the taxes due on the new value created. So first year would be an 80, it would then go to 70, 60, 50, 40. I believe, over those 5 years. And we always try to do some estimates on on what that might look like for various projects or various types of properties around town. And we really started looking at it more closely when we were considering your question from last time about about how we might be able to incorporate having a requirement for sustainability features built into this. And when you look at the numbers and you look at the the target for who this program is essentially designed for. And recall that we're trying to create incentives for some of those businesses that don't get to enjoy the benefits that come with large projects in urban renewal areas. Those are mom and pop shops. They're often properties that are valued at $1 million or maybe $2 million. So with the requirement then that the urban renewal or urban revitalization tax exemption area, within that you must create at least a 15% increase in value. We started looking at what that would mean for various projects, and we have a chart here. We have a chart of examples here, with the first being a property that is $500,000, and you could think about the area that is actually around south of Pepperwood, around Olympic Court, and there's some smaller properties, very viable businesses working very well, that are valued somewhere between $500,000 and $800,000, those buildings. And for a building to affect a 15% improvement in their value, for example, in the first example of the $500,000 building, they would have to improve the value by $75,000. And oftentimes, well, as we all know, when we've made improvements to our own homes, you can spend $100,000 on a home and come out with $10,000 worth of new value on it. So we were looking at what that improvement, that large, at least $75,000 improvement would mean in tax savings. And on that first row there, 5 years of taxes on the whole property would be $124,000. Compare that then with the tax exemption they would enjoy, and that value would only be $7,700 total over those 5 years. So you can see for those essentially smaller businesses, for a $7,700 exemption on your $124,000 worth of taxes, it's a big ask for somebody to do at least a significant sustainability project. So if we were to require photovoltaic panels or brand new windows all around, would you, A, be able to get to achieve the 15% increase in value for the amount of money you would have to spend just to get $7,700 back? So that's on the small end. But and then you can jump up to, say, $1 million building, and obviously the numbers double here. But still, in the second example, the improvement would have to be worth at least $150,000. And for that, the tax exemption over 5 years on that property would be just $15,400. So again, even on $1 million property, and some examples there would be like, I looked up on the assessor's site, Sherwin-Williams is right around $1 million. Burger King down there is right around $1 million or so. Where it gets significant and where we might be able to justify requiring a larger investment in sustainability features is when there are larger projects, such as the new Enterprise car rental building that's just in front of the old Menards. That you can see here, that created a lot of new value simply because there hadn't been a building on that site, a $2 million building it is now. Their taxes on that are about $344,000 in a 5-year window. Our tax exemption, if applied there on that particular improvement, would have equaled $136,500. Was that making sense? I'm kind of walking through that. So we've got two other examples here: the Paul's renovation into the Harbor Freight store and others along in there on Highway 1, and then the old Kmart renovation. These are actual numbers here. So those projects, because of their nature and because of their size, might provide enough funding over the 5 years for a person to consider significant investment in sustainability. What we wanted to discuss with you is knowing this now, how would you like us to proceed with this tax exemption area, these tax exemption areas, knowing the sort of vast difference in benefit that could come to our commercial areas, and knowing that we want to extend benefits to maintain small businesses, keep them growing here in Iowa City, et cetera, et cetera. Did I frame that up okay, you think?
With the exemption schedule that you've given us, the 80, 70, 60, 50, 40, is that the max that we can go under state law?
We could continue that for another 5 years and in a continuously declining schedule. That's one option. We couldn't go any higher on any of those years. We could also do alternatively 3 years of 100% exemption on the new value.
And the 3-year schedule and the 5-year schedule are roughly equal
Okay.
for net present value. The 10-year schedule is more of a benefit. We were a little nervous going to 10 years given that we haven't used this program before. We haven't used this provision in state code. So, it's a little more unknown the farther you go out. And values will fluctuate over those 10 years on their own, even without this program. So looking at the, as Wendy said, kind of the vast difference in the tax benefits, one way we could treat it is that if it's new construction, that's one category effectively, as opposed to a renovation on, say, a $500,000 building. It's hard to imagine how $7,700 would be enough to incentivize, something substantial that would still increase the value 15%. Those solar panels aren't going to increase the value of the property substantially. So it's hard to picture how that would work out. But say, Paul's renovated without any tax incentives from us. So if we can use that as a carrot to entice them to do some more sustainability benefits, that maybe that meets a threshold in which we could do that. And another idea that we kicked around was to require a mid-am audit that's free to the property owner, even with those smaller projects. So, say you're getting a $7,700 tax benefit, perhaps that information being in your hands is helpful as well, just having that audit in place.
So I'm afraid I didn't read this carefully enough. I ran out of time, basically. So I'm feeling a little bit underinformed with regard to a couple of things. So do I understand correctly that you're proposing something that would be targeted towards sustainability improvements, or is that just a possible way in which money?
That's just a possible way.
Yeah, okay.
We'd also talked about childcare, I think, maybe.
Right, other public benefits, essentially. We started with this program, as Wendy said, to try and have some sort of incentive program for, say it's a 1 or 2 story commercial building that otherwise isn't going to rise to the level to get a TIF incentive from us. We were trying to, one of the criticisms we heard that we were focusing our public investment, tax investment in limited areas or to a limited number of property owners. And so we were trying to expand that pool, but sometimes with some of these benefits, especially on those smaller value properties, it feels like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, that it might be a stretch for some of those improvements.
Okay, a couple other things on my mind, then I'll stop here. First, can you provide examples? Don't answer this right yet. Let me get the other question out. So can you provide examples of the kinds of investments or businesses, et cetera, in the areas that are designated in that map you showed us, Wendy? Can you provide examples of what could possibly happen and that would be responsive to this particular tax incentive? The second is, how can we protect ourselves from providing tax incentives for investments that would take place regardless of the tax incentive?
Well, the second question first, it will be very difficult to do that piece of it, not evaluating the projects on a case-by-case basis. As opposed to TIF, where you have to approve each project as they come through, this is a by right incentive. And so it'd be hard to parse out who would have done the project anyway. We're not going to be doing a gap analysis on a case-by-case basis on these. And part of the logic is to provide some certainty for those. Most communities that use this provision in state code, it's communities that aren't getting investment at all, that are trying to incentivize some type of building. And obviously, we're not in that boat. So that's probably why we haven't used it to date, but we do have some commercial areas that aren't seeing that same investment. And so hopefully extending these areas to those commercial districts will help spur some investment, or at least maybe be the tipping point in which somebody would make that investment, or maybe do it a little bit sooner, or maybe they can make that investment a little bit larger than they would have otherwise. If they were going to invest in their property and it was only going to be a projected 10 or 12% increase in value, maybe this is enough to push them to do a little bit more there. So to your first question, examples of investments, those three at the bottom there are actual projects. And that's where we felt that there were almost two tiers of these. If somebody's building a new building on what is currently a parking lot, they're probably going to do that regardless. If they're going to invest $2 or $3 million, it's probably irrespective of whether or not they're getting $136,000 in tax benefits. And so that's where we felt that maybe there was some wiggle room to put an additional requirement there. If Enterprise Rent-A-Car is building anyway, maybe we say you can take advantage of this program if you do X, Y, and Z for us, whether that's childcare or sustainability features or what have you. We can cap the level of investment. We could say that this is for investments between A and B, and that anything greater than that isn't eligible for the program. And so we could remove some of those larger projects, or we could have them tiered such that those larger projects are then subject to additional requirements.
Simon, are there any existing communities that already have environmental incentives for tax abatement that we could model?
Not that I'm aware of using this provision of state code. The examples we've looked at were mostly either residential programs that were for areas that were completely blighted, or were for very distressed commercial districts that they were just looking for somebody to do something, whether they had vacant buildings or surface parking lots or what have you, just trying to spur some investment.
And in terms of the childcare, how would, obviously that wouldn't be across the board. We can't have 1 million childcare. How would that work? Would we have, because we can't, it has to be generalized. How does that work? Maybe I direct that to Eleanor in terms of, I think for like the environmental standard, that maybe could be, universalized, but how would that work if we were to do something along those lines?
I think an ongoing obligation to provide something is going to be much more difficult to deal with this tool than something that's part of the construction up front.
So my concern is valid. Okay.
Sure. Yeah, the difference with TIF is we certify that year by year. They don't get that year's tax rebate unless we say you have fulfilled your obligations. This one, once it's approved at the assessor's office, it doesn't come back to us at all. They just don't pay those taxes up front.
So I definitely think if we're providing tax incentives for some form of new construction, that it needs to be tied to our climate action objectives and carbon emission reduction objectives. Anything else would be hypocritical. So we need to figure out how to do that. And if it's illegal, well, it's illegal. But if it's legal, we need to figure out how to do it.
Yep, there's a lot of,
I don't think it's a question of legality. I think it's a question of, as Simon's talked about, whether it's going to work from an incentive financial perspective.
But in terms of that $7,000 example that you used, if they're going to already, that's assuming that the only improvement they make is for the environmental improvement, what if they're already going to do even a higher amount, right? And this would just be part of that. So like say, for example, the renovation to Harbor Freight, they may not, they may have been willing to do that anyway, but once they're aware of that, oh, I can qualify for this, then they may be incentivized to do something they otherwise would not have done, which I still think is a good idea. The second thing related to that issue is there may be a lot of people that, presumably they'd already be eligible for other state and federal tax credits, so this would be in addition to other eligible tax credits and incentives that they could do. So I think to that concern, I would still want to at least try to do it. And I can't imagine there aren't some communities, maybe it's always good to start with Iowa, obviously, but somewhere in the United States where we could have a identifiable, workable standard for what those sort of building requirements look like. Eleanor, could we adopt, for example, we've talked about how we don't have the regulatory authority to require a higher standard than the state, but could we require a higher standard as a condition of receipt of the property tax?
Yes, I think.
Abatement, okay. Well, that strikes me as one relatively 2018 or whatever staff decides that would be relatively feasible.
I think I agree. I think we need to do something that's tiered and maybe even, I guess I want some more time to think about this before we actually vote on recommending moving it forward. Does that sound
More like a
reasonable
work
to the other
session,
two?
sort
Yeah.
of, yeah.
I just, because in seeing this grid for the first time, because I don't think that was in the packet, was it? Yeah, okay. So seeing this for the first time and thinking about some of the comments that staff has made in terms of, you have these smaller projects and, the amount of taxes that are going to get exempted over a 5-year period is probably not enough incentive to change somebody's behavior in terms of what they're doing. And so what kinds of additional requirements we might want to put on that or not put on that. And I think that even comes into the new construction. Maybe if that new construction is over $1 million or over $2 million or whatever, threshold we might come up with, then maybe at that point you're looking at more significant requirements in terms of the environmental sustainability and those sorts of things. Because the other thing I look at with these, and while I agree with you, Jim, on the environmental sustainability, there comes a point where people are, and you've got to figure out what that level is in terms of what are we going to require in terms of that sustainability and what the cost is. But if you look at the map, I look at those and look at these areas as ones where, in general, we need some revitalization. These are getting kind of old and worn down, and maybe not every building in the area is looking that way, but there's enough of it that you could be getting to the tipping point in these areas. And so just looking at incentivizing that improvement and what that does to the other buildings around it and what it also does to the tax base. So it's not that I'm saying we shouldn't put some requirements in on the environmental, but I think we need to look carefully at that. So I'd like a little more time to kind of process. And could you email us, Wendy, this chart?
Sure.
That would be helpful to have in front of me as I kind of think through what some of those standards might be and what some of those tiers might be.
Eleanor, are there any limitations in terms of how we can break it up in terms of what qualifies or what doesn't? For example, we can limit it to new construction, or is it like once it's in the district, it has to be across the board? Like, are there any statutory limitations?
You have to define what the qualifying property is.
Okay.
And so as long as you can do that clearly, you could do different incentives for different qualifications. So.
And along with what Susan, maybe sort of synthesizing what Jim and Susan had said, so it sounds like maybe we probably want to keep it simple as possible too.
Right.
But to the extent that we can, it may be that we would want tiered environmental standards so that if it's a bigger project, I'm just thinking out loud here, that maybe we are more demanding, that there'd be more financial wherewithal. If it's more of a micro project, maybe there'd be a little bit more flexibility in terms of what would require. But, and I think staff can maybe just sort of dive into that.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll flesh that out better. Obviously,
As long as
we're
there's not too
clearly,
many categories, maybe one or two.
Well, there's another factor with regard to this energy efficiency part, and that is if they in fact get a financial incentive from the city to invest in enhanced energy efficiency, they're going to benefit in the long run because their utility costs are going to be cut down. So it's not as if
That's the only thing driving
kind
it.
of forcing them to do something that wouldn't benefit them. But I agree about
But you
time.
want them to take advantage of it, and when, I think the little amount of money and the fact you have to increase the value by 15%, it just doesn't pencil out, I think, when you're talking about those small ones.
Right.
and certainly we're still getting our arms wrapped around this
Sure.
program. So we'll do some more research into that and come back with maybe a couple of tiers that could work.
I think, as Simon said earlier, you could still have some kind of educational component in the smaller ones about requiring an audit or that kind of thing that isn't a financial investment. It's all part of that changing the culture thing.
And to complicate things a little bit more, I don't want you to be surprised when you see this come to the full council, but HCDC just did review a proposal that came out of a committee that we put together as part of the Affordable Housing Action Plan. This code chapter can be used for residential as well, and you have more flexibility in that for multifamily residential. And so we put together a committee of staff and outside stakeholders to review it. Basically, we found that with the developers and bankers and everyone in the room that it really didn't pencil out to be used for many projects other than LIHTC projects. So the recommendation that'll be coming to you is to use it for LIHTC projects only, and those would be approved on a case-by-case basis. We wouldn't proactively set up districts like we showed with the commercial areas, but if we did have a LIHTC proposal come forward, it's something that you could consider with the recommendation being a 40% tax exemption over 10 years, and that would require that rents and tenants are at 40% of AMI. Initially, the proposal went to HCDC with renters being up to 60% of AMI, but rents had to be at 40%, with the concern being that if you set those at the exact same level, anybody below that 40% is already cost burdened, and so you have to find tenants that are almost exactly at that 40%, but HCDC modified that recommendation before it'll come back to you to be at 40% for both. So that'll be coming to you soon.
And in response to your question about daycare, I mean, the affordability thing was similar in terms of having to, it's a by right thing, and then you have to monitor, but when you connect it to a LIHTC project that's already got that monitoring in place, independent of the tax exemption.
Yep.
Okay. All right, any other comments? Okay.
The only quick comment is to Eleanor's point about the education. It does strike me that, a lot of times when you talk to a solar provider, you get the sales pitch of how much money you're going to save. I'm wondering, in terms of a part of our economic development as well as our climate change, do we provide that resource now, just in terms of a general assessment for residents in terms of how much money they're likely to save if they adopt a particular environmental sustainability or not? It may be beyond the wherewithal for us to do that, but I'm hoping that if we do some of these incentives and some of those, maybe the business owners sometimes are pretty private about what their costs are, but to the extent that they can, it'd be nice once we start developing these projects if they can say, hey, I've saved, I'm part of this green district, I've saved X number of dollars. Hopefully we can also get some imitation with that.
Yeah, I think as you declared your climate crisis, you asked for more of that education and outreach of staff, and that's going to be part of our plan.
Okay.
Perhaps part of a new position's focus would be to get that information out there.
Okay, from a neutral, non-selling party. Yeah.
Well, and I think just because I was in this meeting yesterday, there is a new nonprofit forming, the Johnson Energy Conservation District.
Yes.
And so that meeting yesterday was just kind of a strategic planning meeting. So they had a draft strategic plan and looking at how they're going to get that organization up and running and kind of what their priorities are going to be. And, a big part of that is going to be education. And then maybe looking at how they or the city or other entities can incentivize, or, so there's people starting to do that work outside of the city structure that I think it's going to be important for us to keep in touch with and coordinate with, who may be really able to help with this kind of on the ground level of making some significant changes. So I'm really looking forward to the work that they're doing. So,
Susan?
Okay. Item number 6, staff report.
I don't have anything else.
It's okay.
That's all right. That's all right. Anything?
You've talked a lot.
Anything else from the committee? I just real quickly want to thank staff again in the city manager's office. I think the work that you have done so far with Tailwinds is absolutely the kind of approach that works really well for the developers and for the council. The more that they can know what we expect, it saves them so much time and money and heartache, and they know the hoops they have to jump through. And so I really appreciate your time and effort in giving them direction.
I was going to say that too. I think y'all hit it out of the park today. I know you always try to anticipate what the council as a whole wants to do. Sometimes you hear direct opposite things in terms of what you should do, and it's easier said than done. But it's nice when you feel like there is that alignment where you anticipate what you think, and it turns out we actually do agree with that. So I think just awesome work.
Yeah. Any other business?
Yep. Nope.
Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor? Second?
All those in
I'm
favor
trying to
say
usurp
aye.
your position, Susan.
Aye.
All right, aye.
All right, we are
All right.
adjourned. Thank you.